I'm very happy to know that he is going to present his latest research project, Jaina prosopography database, a new tool for Indological research. We have already met Professor Flugel, I think last year when he gave a lecture here. I did not introduce him and take much of your time. He is a very renowned scholar of Jainism, working for the past several years at SOAS, School of Orient and African Studies of London University. He has published extensively on history, anthropology and sociology of contemporary Jain schools and sects, Jain relic, stupas, Jain Vaishnava syncretism, and the socio-political and legal history of Jain tradition. He is the editor of International Jain Studies and co-editor of Jain Studies newsletter of the Center of Jain Studies, and he is a series editor of Ruthless Advances in Jain Studies and Jain Studies of Horoscopes. I welcome him and request him to make his presentation. I also welcome Professor Zamkerkar. As you know, I am very happy to welcome you and you all. Please.
I think I better stand up because this part is blocked by the most important thing, the display, but otherwise you can't see it, hear me. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to have the opportunity to present our research work here, and this is also in view of potential collaborations which we're discussing with the Bandarkar Institute, Oriental Research Institute. Now, if you mind to speak outside. Thank you. Hands up, who knows what prosopography is? Who does not know what prosopography is?
We generally seem to know. We don't know whether we know it right.
Anyway, I mean, we are not the first using this technology, research technology, but we are developing basically a database, an analytical database for material that has already been published. There's no new primary information here. It's just about data processing. And by bringing information together, of course, you produce more information. The information creates information, it's like that. And of course, we want to gain more insight into history, and information is not there for its own sake. Now let me press ahead. This is roughly what I'm going to present. A quick preview, so you get the fundamental idea before I go into all these nitty-gritty issues. Short history of prosopography as a research method. Then the Jaina prosopography, introduction. And then the most important bit, the coding schemes for reassembling data that already have been published. And I give you also at the end some information on other database projects, so you see how it's embedded in the larger field. Now, the aim of our particular prosopography project is to learn more about the social and religious history in India. So it's relatively limited. You can use the same technology also for studying intertextual relationships, and our data set also allows that. But we're not going inside of a particular body of texts, such as the TEI based approach. I don't know whether you have text encoding initiative. They basically recode Sanskrit texts or Tibetan or whatever by putting some signs in, and then the computer can read it and analyze it according to the coding scheme. Our scheme is a classical database. We develop a set of categories to answer such questions. Who is who in Indian history? And we are particularly interested in Jain history. Mostly we rely on sources that exist, and most sources relate to monks and their patrons. There is simply nothing else. And this is what we have to live with. There is, of course, more to discover, but these are the sources. What, where, when, all these classical questions. Of course, you can study these things by going to each individual source, but to bring the information together requires a titanic effort. And you know, in a lifetime, usually for each scholar, just one author they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Or one text, you know, Bhagavata Purana, that is enough for a whole group of scholars. But to bring information together from different sources, to aggregate it, that requires an effort on top of this very foundational research. So what we are looking for is a structural analysis, looking at the relationship of people, places, events, and texts. Texts in different forms. This is a quick preview, very, very simple. It's kind of a network analysis. Here you have a set of people which are related in different ways, like us, you know. We know each other to different degrees. Not everyone knows everyone else, and you can study these things. In the end, you find some kind of structure, be it, you know, language ability, time, place, whatever, gender. And you can also get a total universe of all relationships with the help of a computer. You can't do this with pen and paper. With the dictionary project, as you know, it takes 100 years sometimes to complete it. And then there's so many data, you lose sight of the way they're related. It's just too complex. So you need a way of analyzing, say, dictionary data. Otherwise, you just can look at the single entry you are particularly interested in, but you cannot see the whole structure. For this, luckily nowadays we have computers, and you can study all kinds of relationships, whatever it is, people, text, etc., in this way. But you have to, of course, prepare the data accordingly. Now let me see whether this thing works. It never does. But I just want to enchant you with Kavita, or not Kavita, Amrita. Is she here?
I think you can copy the link.
Yeah, but this thing is so... oh, something comes. Ah,
Yes.
okay. I just pulled this from the internet as an example to show you how relationships can also be, once you have prepared the data, shown in a dynamic format. Is it running? It should. Anyway, it probably, it's slowly upward. It uploads. Basically, you can see the relationships changing over time. So you can, yeah, I'm a bit, why is this not working? I have no idea. This thing here is so sensitive, it needs a delicate hand. But I think you get the general abstract idea. You see then the relationships changing according to the way in which you put the data in. For instance, let us assume a very simple change of place. You have a map, then you can say migration patterns in time. You can represent these things visually in different forms, in the abstract network form or in mapping format, etc., etc. I think we believe that the system is too sensitive for our crude presentation. And just to point this out, I mean, it's a fabulous, now 15 to 20-year-old project on Chinese history. It will take too long to upload it and get it running. This is based at Harvard, but it's also networked with universities in China. It's all over the place. Whoever leads the project that shifts from one area to another. And they have massive information. I mean, hundreds of thousands of data on particular individuals from historical sources, particularly administrators, and you can learn quite a lot on social structure, etc., from the archive. And they mapped it, and they have dynamic maps, and you can see whatever recruitment patterns or whichever question you ask. I mean, there are precedents, this is what I'm saying, of this kind of analysis, but the questions they ask, you know, how they put the data in, how they code the material, that of course is different in every project. But the data can be used in many ways for other projects as well. So this is a really fantastic thing. For India, nothing like this exists, you know, and they do it for 15 years or so. We're talking about long-term collaborative projects. There's so many data. You cannot assume one or two people to produce something useful. You really have to get as many data as possible. Now, very briefly, the prosopographical method, of course, started much earlier at the time when computers were not available. And these guys here from the University of Berlin, they were the first to develop this idea. They collected, with Theodor Mommsen, very famous, collected inscriptions on the Roman Empire around the Mediterranean. And there are many more inscriptions of that empire than you have in Jaina history. I mean, many, many, many more. You know, emperors and whatever. The place is dotted with inscriptions. So it's a massive set of data, raw data on these inscriptions, like the epigraph there, Indica, but even bigger. Now, what to make of it? And so Mommsen, he thought what we next need is a study of individuals. Who is who and who relates to whom. Because there are many names are identical and you don't know, is it this senator or that senator? They have the same name, and so on. So just to find out what actually happened, you needed that instrument, and they did it by pen and paper. The project was declared to be finished. It was started in the 1880s. It was declared to be finished 3 years ago. And of course it isn't finished. More than 100 years. Amazing. So the Jain materials are small. I mean, think about Hinduism also. I mean, that is a fantastic thing. And here you have examples of other pen and paper prosopographies, mainly on Mediterranean history, the Roman materials, and so on. Also religious personalities were included. You can see this was mainly done in Germany, UK, and France. Now, prosopography, to cut it short, you can read in these 2 articles published this year, and many of the things I would take a long time to explain. I recommend the text for the library, not just because of my contribution, selected papers from the Jaina Studies panels, the World Sanskrit Conferences, and Gift of Knowledge, which was just released a few days ago, and actually this is why I'm in India, one of the many reasons. And so please have a look at these texts. Primary sources in Jaina prosopography. Like in the Roman materials, you have inscriptions, you have manuscripts and different types of inscriptions. You know, on bronzes, you have little donative inscriptions, you know, whoever gave it, presiding monk, and the date, and all these things. They seem to be totally insignificant. They have never been studied. But if you pull the information together, just the historical information, you know, who's who, what, where, when, then you get a pattern which no one has ever seen before. You may have seen a small bit of your area, that is a local history in Pune, Jains in Pune, or whatever. You know. But to get the whole picture is too much. All the languages even. Then, so this is a first stage of research. In any prosopographical research. Second stage is very well known to you. Cataloging, publishing the raw data, and manuscript catalogs, etc. Ideally, publishing the text, of course, getting the manuscripts published. Then third stage of research is something like the Jaina prosopography by Klatt, which I presented here last time. He was the one who pulled the data together in a prosopographical framework like Mommsen did on the Roman materials. So it's kind of a who's who, where, when, what, but in a raw format. But it presupposes all the other levels of research, you know, primary data collection, publishing. He used the catalogs, all these things here, Epigraphia Indica, Epigraphia Carnatica, etc., to produce this. Otherwise, it would not be possible. It builds up generations of research. Okay. The next thing that happened in research is fairly recent. This is the introduction of computing into Jaina studies, amongst other fields. And one of the first who did this with regard to Jaina materials were in general terms the Japanese, but they did mainly linguistic analysis of word lists which they collated from the text. A kind of prosopographical analysis, however, using the TEI format approach, which I mentioned before, text encoding initiative, was done by Himal Trika with regard to a set of Digambar philosophers. One of them has produced a text of 1,000 leaves, and it's worthwhile putting all this in the computer and let the computer do some content analysis, because to do it by pen and paper would take decades. So he developed something like this, and there's a web page. The entries are about 300 people, Digambar philosophers in the main. However, coding that is required for a prosopographical database, as Klatt has started it, but as he would like to do this with computers as well, started implicitly already in the process of cataloging. So you know Weber's famous catalog of the Jaina manuscripts and others of the Berlin Library has been copied by generations, and he used this coding scheme: date, place, stripes, relatives, patterns. You know, if you look at the index, they were all lumped together. Works, authors, relatives, patrons, lumped together in one index, and then subjects. And he has 150 pages index, you know, all the raw data, to make the data accessible. You know, without an index, you don't find anything. You know, maybe if there's an alphabetical order and you know already something, you're able to identify the bit you're interested in. So you need indexes, and very simply put, a prosopographical database is a very sophisticated index, a meta-index that links different indexes who point to a number of pieces of information. Now you find the who's who information is also here. but it hasn't been analyzed. The structure of it hasn't been analyzed. It's just listed, name X and page number, but the links have not been analyzed. Yeah, this is what he did. Let's not waste time on that. Yeah, this is his coding scheme. So it's written in German, but basically he uses these abbreviations: BR, CK, LM, NPS, etc., like the computer scientists, to indicate these relationships. Brother, commentator, king, teacher, mother, nephew, patron, son, disciple, father. So these he identified as the key relationships important to understand the production of these manuscripts. Who is the author, who funded it, and so on. And he used these codes in the presentation of the data. So okay. King, son of Todara, is Govardhana Daviraja, is the king and son of Todara. He is P, patron of Krishna Pandita. Yeah, you see, there is an analysis going on here, and he did it as far as he expected as he could do it. But of course, he did not interrelate the people. And I mean, this is what you can do with a prosopography that only looks at these relationships. And you see, it's already in these catalogs. You have the different coding schemes. I skipped this because you're well familiar with these things. Inscriptions are very formulaic in the Jaina tradition. They're already coded in the raw form. They only look at certain aspects of human beings. When they're date, is it school, Gacha, Ghana, etc., patron, community members. And Bühler identified the basic pattern. But successors have added to it. So formulaic scheme of the inscriptions. This one has been translated by Klatt. And if you analyze it, the prosopographically relevant information is here highlighted in bold. The people who are involved, the date, and their roles. Consecrator and patron, and so on. Date, place. This is the prosopographically relevant information. You have to extract it out of the published data. And that you can then manipulate again. Nice to see you.
Sorry to disturb you all.
So in the Klatt, you find his entries are structured like this. He extracted information and then has Diksha, Patadara, kind of a life course of a month, and so on. So he already has a kind of first stage prosopographical summary of the data under headings, single names. So this is a third stage analysis. But of course he has about more than 10,000 names, and and no index. So how these are related? I mean, when I look at his text, I go via search and replace, So I see that I can print it out. I can look at individual links, but to get the whole pattern of links, that is impossible. You need another level of analysis, and for that we are using computers, and this basically is the Jaina prosopography. So the implicit prosopographical scheme that Klatt has used, I extracted by analysis, and I think it's fairly accurate what I've found. monastic name, birth date, birthplace, father, mother, gotra, given name, initiation date, initiation place, initiator, date of installation of acharya, place of installation of acharya, as acharya, accomplishments, installed this and that statue, inspired building of temple X, Y, and Z, date of death, place of death, remarkable historical events, meeting this and that king, and so on. So these are the items that struck him to be significant. For anything else, there was mainly no information available. But already, if you look at this type of information, you can figure out what kind of structures the people who produced these materials consider to be relevant. And we can study these structures by the technology which we have now. Previously, you couldn't study them as structures, only with regard to the number of inscriptions, but not as a network structure. So this is what I just said to you. An example again of blood. You can see how you apply these things. A son born Isha Acharya composed this and that. Here texts come in as accomplishments, and so on. And you have also, you can look at the relationship also from the point of view of the item that, or the event. With regard to an object, you can study relationships such as produced by, under patronage of, and for. There are 4 different individuals here involved. What is their relationship? They're a complex relationship. We were all used to compute kinship relationships. I mean, they're mind-boggling. Usually I cannot follow, after one cousin, I lose track. But with computers one can figure out all these relationships. And I've done an analysis of all the entries related to patronage in blood, which he labeled patronage, but whatever is patronage is an interesting thing, and I wrote a little article on it. I mean, it can be patronage if you bless something, it can be patronage if you give cash, or if you give an agreement for a text to be copied, or something like this. It is not of one visit. So I use color coding here just to experiment as an early stage. And this statistic is not valid anymore. The published one is more, it's the complete one. This was a preliminary one. But you can see that in the data which has coded in this way, following in a way paper, most patterns that were recorded in the materials that he used were kings, Hindu kings. And they supported also monks, of course, but in any case, if you do this on a large scale and in a more sophisticated way, then this test some patterns will emerge. Now we come to boring. It gets interesting. Kapadia's catalog. This is the one we are interested in particular, and the texts that are related to this, and I hope we can start collaborating on this. Kapadia did not this analysis, as Club did not do it, but I extracted the implicit prosopographical terms he used to present the material. I mean, he's interested in these things: deities, kings, queens, scribes, schools and sects, caste, monks and nuns, laity, non-Jain householders, works, and sections. And this is represented in one way or another in your category. Now, what kind of, unfortunately, Kapadia did not develop a system of codes to apply to the indexes of his manuscript catalogs. An analysis of the types of specific information he presents in his list yield the following more differentiated list of categories. So this is what I've done. So he used these categories according to me, and I think it is fairly accurate. The biographic data, coded name, designation, death, age, kinship relationships, father, mother, wife, etc., female relative of, caste, lineage, occupational role, other social relationships, friend, colleague, helper, spiritual kinship, descendant, guru, pupil, female, male, etc., Vidya guru, spiritual seniority, senior, junior, two, succession, successor, predecessor of, spiritual disciplehood, devotee of, Shravaka of, group relationship, founder, first apostle, Kapadia's words, member of, schismatic, etc. Then the time codes and place codes. Visitor to, native of, you know. So he operated in a not openly declared way with such categories in practice. Now you can rationalize the scheme and compare it with you know, what is needed to really understand the whole field and other catalogs, other primary sources, and then develop an approach to analyze all these things. And this is what we did with regard to Jain. It's the same. Jaina materials. So this is a second stage prosopography. First stage is just collecting, as Club did, and Kapadia to some extent. And now we go one step further using a database to analyze these data that have already been collected by first stage prosopography. Now I would need this on the, actually because it's so sensitive that, I mean, let's just open one. The last one, that one I need. You may have to copy it into the thing. Now, our prosopography project basically takes the Clark volume, which I hope the library has here, and takes it apart into its constitutive elements, according to the implicit coding schemes and coding schemes which we have developed from the point of view of analysis of religious and social history, the relationship between the two. And we are not imposing some analytical scheme, but we have, say, kinship relationships. We have, okay, that is a code. But what kind of relationship there is, actually the sources tell us. So we have the Sanskrit and whatever language it is in, the word that is used in the text, and that is collected and put into the database. So you get automatically, inductively, a list of terms that are used. You know, we're not just using English, it's a kinship relationship, and putting crosses, you know, father, mother, son. But we use the original terminology and record it as well. So you get the vocabulary too. But it's a kind of a combination of the two. Okay, great. You can click on sign in. This is not yet publicly visible. Sure. Why am I not there? Because it's not your. Yeah, maybe I. Can you sign in? Okay. Yeah, this is why it's easier. We have 8, number 8, at soas.ac.uk. So I show you how the data entry is done. And we work with the CLUD. The CLUD has about 10,000 or more names, quite a huge number, already aggregated data. But of course, it is by no means complete. After all, where's the hash sign? Hash. And once we yeah, please do. I mean, I can talk about it in abstract, but just you see then what kind of work is required by those of you who may have an interest in getting involved. This work is done online, it can be done all over the world. You know, whoever wants to collaborate, whether it's Harvard or the LD Institute or whatever. You don't need to visit any place. Use your own computer and materials. Please, do you touch it? Admin. And then on my name, I think it's hopeless. We simply skip it. Yeah, great pity. Anyway, what I would have shown is basically a very complicated data input scheme. And the taxonomy that we have developed by analyzing the data. Taxonomy means coding categories that prove to be necessary to represent the complexity of the data that is published. And we hope to be able, at the moment we have put in data on about 3,000 individuals and their relations as recorded. It is obviously already the largest ever database on Indic materials done in this way, so I can present it as such. But it by no means matches what is required to do a quantitative analysis. Of course, you can do little diagrams and things, you know, showing the networks of an individual market, at which places people were. You can map these things, you know, you have mapping facilities, and you can graphically display all these things, also dynamically moving in time. You can show people going from one charcoal mouse place to another, and so on and so forth. Yeah, forget about it. Can we go back to the... I think you get the main idea, and those of you who are interested in this, we can maybe afterwards meet and try to connect in peace. Who would like to get involved? So I unfortunately have to skip this. Go to the SOAS website, and you find some abstract descriptions of the project. And we have funding till the end of next year. I will apply for more funds. Basically, there's one researcher, Dr. Cornelius Kuntelmann, who also co-edited the CLUD volume with me. And I mean, he sits at home. He has a PhD in Jainology in Prague, and sits in his computer at peace and does all these data entry things. We had one intern from Ghent University. He was very good. He put in data from Epigraphia Indica. So we have the whole chain data of that also in there. We now move to the Epigraphia Venatica. And these are all published things. We hope the Bori data could be also used. And I would like to inspire you to get involved, to link up with us. I mean, this is a tool, nothing else. It's not an interpretation as such. You have to understand, it's also not a data input thing. You have to understand what kind of relationships are represented in an inscription, say, in a colophon. You have to be familiar with the vocabulary and with Jain monastic structure and so on, otherwise you will not be able to figure it out properly. So it needs really a highly skilled individual. Nice to see you. To do this. And there are not many, as you know, in the world who are expert in Jainology, manuscriptology, and so on, all these disciplines. And we have to stick together, otherwise we will never get a massive dictionary done in good time.
Yeah.
The Pali dictionary, how long is it in work?
It stopped.
It stopped.
Pali dictionary,
Right.
I'm referring to Jaina dictionary.
Yes.
The projects, they had to be suspended many years ago.
Yes.
Now there is an attempt of starting it again.
So it shows, you know, how easily the good ideas cannot or only will partially materialize. But the Jaina data, I can say that, they're fairly limited. If you would do something like this for all of Indian religious history, that would be, it will come, you know, in decades, centuries. Everything will end up in a computer. That is for sure. You can be part of the pioneers, or you can be latecomers. That's the only thing. And the thing can be early or late in materialization. But it will happen. That's for sure. And so there are lots of data in Digambara inscriptions and so on in southern India. And we hope also to strike some kind of arrangement. And collaboration, I mentioned that already, would mean, of course, that people simply use the tool and they can also analyze things. I mean, this is a free product, you know, it has been funded by some British research council. We, I think, produced a good analytical software. We also have an inbuilt language switch. You can switch from Nagari to Roman and back. That is quite good. And just use it. You know, the only thing that needs kind of a central control, wherever it is based. It can be based in India, in Japan, or in China. Is the format has to be consistent. There must be an editor. Otherwise, you will not recognize that a name that is written in variant ways actually refers to the same person. Then, of course, you have homologies and how to disambiguate all these things. You know that from Wikipedia. It's difficult. If you can't with evidence, then we leave it separate. You know, we have the same name separate several times. And there are certain technical solutions which took us a long time to figure out, also in view of other databases, how to. Oh, that, yeah, here is just, well, these are our techies in Sheffield University. They have a Digital Humanities Institute, and they do databases. They say ours is the most complicated they ever done. This is why they ask more money. and this is where the actual data initially will be hosted. They do it for free, which is also good, yes. So this is just a, you know, a general web page where you will find, you see that was the funding institute, or is it, which we have. SOAS, I mean that's me, etc. And Sheffield is doing the technological thing, and that will be finished basically in a few months. It's complete, but the final data will be hosted on this web page. There will be, you know, a click thing, and then you can search the data as you like. You know, there are many databases, Sanskrit dictionaries, Indo-Aryan language dictionaries, and whatever. It's all free online. However, to use the data set to add further data and to do complex analysis, for that you would need permission, because we don't want the data to be messed up. You know, if someone by careless use is changing things, then it has great effects. It has to be as accurate as possible, and there are so many problems, of course.
You can have database which can be accessible but not editable.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But collaborating institutes with bona fide credentials, you know, like yours, you know, who have expertise and who know how this thing works, they can then get access and use it as they like, you know. But there must be some control just to preserve the data format and make sure the database is not becoming unusable. Otherwise, it's totally free, and we have no proprietary interest in it at all. We also have no money to disseminate, so it's really about collaboration informed by common interest. So if this is valuable, then please consider it. And this is not yet live. This is just a page that explains a little bit about the project. So let's go back to the and go to the next slide. Great. Well, this is what I mentioned, what we're doing right now, the cloud data. And this, I think, we will finish until our this initial phase of the project is completed. So we will have produced the tool and data on this. I mean, there will be maximum of, let us say, 15,000 entries. This is, you know, it's a high figure, but that is only a fraction of information available. And I'm running around to India, motivating collections like Shruta Bhavan to join us in this, but whether the data are actually detailed enough in these already existing electronic databases is a question. You know, if you just have a list of names and a list of titles and maybe a year, some of the information is useful, say, to know when the manuscript was produced by whom. But much of the rest, you know, of cataloging information is irrelevant to analysis like this. But there is some use to databases that are continuously being prepared in India, National Manuscript Mission and so on, where you can take bits and pieces of information to reconstruct history. There is a lot of proprietary interest. You know, people put their lifeblood into these projects, and sharing seems to be difficult. But otherwise, you know, these data are simply dumped, or projects are half finished, left to be revived 100 years later, like the Clark project, which we revived 100 years later, and at least brought that to completion. Okay, the next thing which we are trying to do, and try to get funding for it, fingers crossed, is we look at the European manuscript catalogue, Weber, Balbier, and Chet in British Library, National Library in Paris, collection in Florence, and so on. There are a few thousand things and so on. And we motivate others to join. Then we want to move on to the Prashasti Sangrahas and things like this. It's all published material, you know. There's nothing secret here, no proprietary interests. You know, we have it on our shelves. It's just really expertise, time, and so on that is needed, and then we can get a wonderful thing. So finally, once you have a database, even if it's not complete, you can work with it and find interesting things for your specific research project. Say, Monk so in Karnataka, Hampana Nagarajaya, he asked me, I showed him this thing, can you find out something about Gollacharya? Acharya, I've heard of it. I said, in Shohanabel in his inscription, there is a lot, he's mentioned all the time. And then we typed in Gollacharya in different ways in the search function, nothing popped up. And then, of course, it occurred to me, it is better just to type in the first two characters because you never know how it was entered. Acharya is recorded in the database as title, office. So the name is Golla. So we typed in Golla and there it popped up with his lineage as recorded by Klatt on the basis of Fleet's publication from 1880s or so. And he was very impressed. But it shows you how an analysis is required, of names. Very Gollacharya, it's a title here. Professor it's considered to be part of the name, isn't it? But really there are different elements to it. And if you do an analytical database, you atomize everything. You need to atomize all items and so on. Other prosopographical databases, Asian studies, apart from this wonderful Chinese project, really groundbreaking. There is a database on I'm coming from a hot country. Perso Indica. We have already many more names in data than they did, and they worked on it for 8 years. This is on manuscripts related to text in Persian and Sanskrit. And there's a lot of interest at the moment on the cultural interface. And then there is a database which is very much related to this Lahore library, which has a lot of Jain manuscripts as well. And the University of... Exactly. That was the collaboration between Lahore and Vienna, and that database is there. There's some information is there. You can all access this online. It's all open and free. Then there's Pandit, Yigal Bronna, that was started on the basis of the remains of a project by Sheldon Pollock. That was called knowledge systems, Indian knowledge, Sanskrit knowledge system. And they had a database mainly on text related to science, I think, in Sanskrit. But there were only 120 names, and it was forgotten and not further developed. Yigal Bronna then melted it together with another smaller database of his, and then the Potter database was also incorporated with mainly bibliographies and a few other things. So it's a magnificent source. But even after so many years, this started only 3 years ago. But it builds up from 2000 onwards. There are 4,000 names, and widely diverse. And the analytical scheme, we were thinking of joining this, but the analytical scheme did not have codes to represent the contents of the Jain inscriptions and colophons that you want to analyze. So one could put in information there, but at least for the study of Jaina history, it would be of limited interest because of the coding system. But it is there, and as soon as there's something in a computer, you can always import, export, and reshuffle the data in one way or another. Then there's the database. Michael Willis, Sidham, they have photographs of inscriptions, transcribe inscriptions, and translate. And it's a small database, but quite excellent. Is also in process. 2017. Final slide. The obvious advantages of collaborating in these fields is to avoid duplication, economical use of scarce resources, increasing speed and likelihood of completion and usability, enhancing cooperation between work groups and transfer of skills, and finally cross-fertilization of ideas and insights, and that's what we will do. Thank you very much.
So any questions?
What happens in databases like these where the sources really don't match with each other? Like say for the Pattavalis, you have various Pattavalis,
Yes.
where maybe there is genealogies mentioned and maybe you're picking up names but they really don't match. So how would this help?
Well, sometimes you have only one source, and an individual is only mentioned once at one place. Then you cannot establish any relationship, but that is a relationship. A non-relationship is a relationship, but it can also mean, it can mean two things. There is no relationship, or we don't know about any relationship, which is more likely. You can only work with what is already there. This is only analyzing material that is already in the public sphere. You know, there are no secrets, it's just helping us to understand complex links. And you never explore the entire relationships, except maybe in the form of maps or other technologies which reduce complexity, you know, and then you can zoom on a certain area and look more for what you're particularly interested in. And this is really just a broad tool to help projects to do their own work. It's really, it's like a dictionary. But that is a good question, and often, sometimes a single entry can take a week because you simply don't know what is meant by a name. Is it a monk? Is it a layperson? And so on. What is the role? Of course, if you don't know, you simply leave the field open. No, you put in the name and nothing else. At least it's on record and you have the source. But then, maybe in 10 years, a new source is put in, or is coming to light freshly. And by linking these two, suddenly it becomes clear what the first one probably referred to. And this is why these research tools are so fascinating. I mean, we use Google every day. That is the most sophisticated machine of that kind. It links everything with everything. But they have, you know, they do market analysis or things like this by using our data from phones, which we don't want to give. So our basic ethical rule is we're only interested in dead people. It should not be used for any control mechanisms. But these are the questions you really deal with day to day.
We find them a lot. We see them a lot. So yeah, it's difficult to
Yes.
put pieces.
This is not easy at all.
And constant updating will be needed as you get fresh data. Things are being published, new things are coming up, new sections are coming up.
What Clark did, he was a librarian, the chief librarian for Asian collections in New Berlin, the Royal Library. He excerpted all the new articles that came in, and that was all unknown information in the 19th century. And instantly filled out these cards, and that was the basis for this. And in a way, as things, I mean, they could build, your journals could build this in, and libraries, when they have electronic catalogs. They have all the reference information there. So far, so good. But you have to go then into the contents. That takes time and expertise. You have to understand, and then if you're interested, put it in. So at this stage, which is preliminary, if this is successful, it will take at least 10 years, then it is best to use what is already published while collecting the new things. Of course, you can use the new things instantly, and that is also good.
The new thing will be sent to the person who can edit the data, because a user cannot edit it.
Yes. I mean, to have, would need an infrastructure.
Not like Wikipedia.
Which is a good thing.
It will be under the control of the administrator.
Administrator.
As I said, databases like this work best like Wikipedia, if they're kind of free and open. But then, in contrast to Wikipedia, there should be an editorial control. Otherwise, you cannot.
Validate them. Validate
It has to be
the sources.
scientific as much as possible. That's the only point. The rest of it is, should go out into the universe.
Can we access the database now just to see obviously what to edit?
And we
No,
have
I mean otherwise, no, not right here, but from my home PC, will I be able to access
Oh,
this
yes.
database?
But you will need access permission. I mean, there's a code. It is not yet live
Okay.
because the search function, this software has not been uploaded for public view. It's still in the stage where just data is being put in. But we don't change the structure anymore. Over 1 year, we changed the structure bits, which small things didn't really match the data. We had to add something, and but now it is well tested, and we can upload analytical software. You click on a name, and then on some visualization, you see a map or a network link or other complexity reducing mechanism. But in the main, you can also simply have lists, like an index. You can print an index, whatever you want to do with a database. And so many relationships. This is all about relationships. Whereas the old indexes, etc., are not about relationships, they are about items. Yes. And that is the new thing with this technology.
Sir, we have, I am from Shruta Bhavan. We have plenty of manuscript data, and we have prepared the more than 200 Excel spreadsheets, and we have to search the particular title of particular author. So we have to search in all the spreadsheets. So we need, is there any tool that we can place this all the data in one database, and we can get the exact what we need to search? Is there any tool available online or offline? We have more than 200 spreadsheets we have entered, different libraries. So we have entered all the data into that. So if one particular title or particular author we have to search, so we have to go to each of the spreadsheet to search the where it is into that. So is there any tool that we can compile all the database into the one source? Is there any tool available for it?
Well, the data mining technology, I call it data mining. But of course, usually you have to transform the data first. You have to harmonize them.
Yeah.
And that needs an analysis. Mechanically, it cannot be done, but the merging itself is no problem with help of computers, but to make sure that you have the same name written in different forms in different sets of data, listed accurately. Now you have to use your brain, unfortunately. You cannot just push a button. But these are the real problems you're also facing. And
but it takes so many time because we need to check whether all the spreadsheet there it is an entry or enter. So if it comes into the one database, so we can search it easily. So a particular library or particular manuscript is there or not.
Minklat took 12 years to assemble data on, let's say, 10,000 monks, mainly.
Yeah.
And really did the same thing as you have. You just have spreadsheets and he has cards, slips of paper.
Yeah.
But you have to do it by hand, as it were. You know, you have to compare and see whether it's the same person or not. If not, you have to have a separate entry. And the key, of course, to harmonize databases is that you have a reference number that is the same for differently written names. But of course, numbers no one can remember, so you have to create an artificial name with a star. You know, this is like the name. You know, in the UK they call me Pete. My name is Peter. Pete. No, not Petri. Not Petri. But anyway, in Italy they call me Pietro. So you can just use one and relate the others to them, but the one is absolutely is an artificial choice. You know, so I can use Pete, then relate Peter, Pietro, Pierre, all to that. But this has nothing to do with the original source, so they have to be kept separate. But otherwise, you cannot integrate the data if you don't have an
because
artificial code.
Excel spreadsheet it has so many limitations. I think 10,000 or more than lot data it is compiled into that.
Yes.
So we have to prepare the new spreadsheet for that. So I'm asking about the tool, where it is any tool available, where we can place the all data and compile over there, and it can search easily.
Yeah. But that is no problem, isn't it, to merge data and have one single spreadsheet?
Yeah.
But you want to rationalize it as well.
Yeah.
Then you face these problems, and that takes time.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a great amount of data. You can't finish next year. It's impossible, even with computers. But we should keep talking. I would be very interested to cooperate with Shruta Bhavan or exchange our experiences with these databases. There's a small community also globally work on these things. I mentioned a few names here. And I think you should link up and get part of the, become part of the network. Thank you.
It's a wonderful tool which you are preparing, and again, as you emphasized, unless collaborative efforts are there, so let us not do that.
It will go ahead, but it will not be as good as it could be. It has gone ahead already. But we only have 3,000 names, we will have 10,000. But there are more. I think 100,000 names will cover most of Jaina history. It is not unachievable. Because again and again, of course, you may have scribes, copyists and so on, there may be more. But the authors at least, and the key people, I mean, that is, I think with 100,000 names you're well served. It sounds a lot, but how much does a telephone directory or email?
Thank you, Professor Flugel, and I request Professor Bahulkar to felicitate Professor Flugel.
We are very thankful. He, despite his busy schedule, he accepted to come here and made a very wonderful presentation. And on behalf of Dr. Institute, I assure that he would be very happy to cooperate with us to the extent possible. We have to explore the possibility and also the methodology to do that. And usually we do that. And we should be happy to be a part of this management project. Thank you very much.
Otherwise, I had to stop speaking. So good to see you. How are you?
That's why I have
And this is